Matla, Matimba, Manda, Ashu. Allemag aan die mense. An injury to one, an injury to one, an injury to one, an injury to one is indeed an injury to all. And that is why the progressive movement worldwide places such a high value on solidarity. Solidarity is one of the fundamental principles of the working class movement and the progressive movement worldwide. Because it's based on the understanding, as Martin Luther King said, that an injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And I think that song that we often sing, Solidarity Forever, captures exactly the importance of that principle. For me personally, part of my political development growing up was in São Paulo, Brazil, from 1978 to 1984. It was a time that Brazil was still under a military dictatorship. It was a time that Comrade Lula led the metal workers of São Paulo in a strike, and out of that, the Brazilian Workers' Party was formed. So I grew up in that environment, and when I came back to South Africa in 1984, I was a student at University of Cape Town. I think I might have heard Comrade Farid addressing a rally or two at UCT. I was in the National Union of South African Students, NUSAS. And one of the first lessons in political education that we received, and I think it was especially relevant for us young white students, standing there with a fist like that, shouting Amandla. So people were saying, why do we do this? And I think many of us in this room would know the answer to that. That if we hold our hands up with our fingers separately, those fingers can be broken off and hurt one by one. But it's the clenched fist that demonstrates solidarity and unity. And I think that is what tonight is all about. And I think it's a powerful symbolic event that here gathered in Johannesburg, South Africa, we have activists united with comrades from Spain in solidarity with comrades from Palestine. And I think it's especially significant that we're demonstrating that solidarity with comrades from Spain, because it takes us back to an era in the history of the world which unfortunately is starting to seem a little bit familiar. That era in the run-up to the Second World War, 1936 to 1939, when a democratically elected government, a left-wing government of the Spanish Republic, was attempted to be unseated by right-wing military forces supported by fascist forces from Germany and Italy. And in response to that attack on the Spanish Republic, progressive people from all over the world formed themselves into the international brigades to go and fight on the side of the Republic against the forces of reaction, against the forces of fascism and Nazism. And unfortunately, we find ourselves again in an international conjuncture where those forces, those right-wing forces of reaction, seem regrettably to be on the ascendancy. And therefore, for us tonight, to stand together here in Johannesburg, in the headquarters of COSATU, surrounded by activists of the ANC, the party, COSATU, the student movement, the youth movement, and the MDM generally, I think sends out a very, very powerful message. Because indeed the plight of the Palestinian people is something that is very, very close to the hearts of us in South Africa, both as a matter of principle, but because of our own experience of struggling against the system of apartheid with the help of forces from all over the world. Our historic friendship with Palestine was developed and deepened by chairperson of the PLO, Comrade Yasser Arafat, and then exiled ANC President Oliver Tambo. This was later solidified by President Nelson Mandela, who was unapologetic in our support for the Palestinian people. Comrade Mandela said, and I quote, "The temptation in our situation is to speak in muffled tones about an issue such as the right of the people of Palestine to a state of their own. We can easily be enticed to read reconciliation and fairness as meaning parity between justice and injustice. Having achieved our own freedom, we can fall into the trap of washing our hands of difficulties that others face. Yet we would be less than human if we did so. It behoves us all South Africans, themselves erstwhile beneficiaries of generous international support, to stand up and be counted among those contributing actively to the cause of freedom and justice." Close quote. The struggle of the Palestinian people is not only a David and Goliath fight for freedom, it is also a test of the humanity of people all over the world. The endless displacement and land grabs by Israel remind us of our own past. Sadly, the Israeli lobby and countries which support Israel have no regard for property rights, for the property rights of Palestinians. We as a government have withdrawn our ambassador to Israel, one of several countries to have done so in response to Israel's increasing violations of international law. We also have numerous memoranda of understanding with Palestine and Palestinian cities. In fact, as Comrade Parks indicated earlier, under progressive leadership, the city of Johannesburg entered into a memorandum of understanding with the city of Ramallah. A city which, by the way, I had, how shall one say, the bitter-sweet experience of visiting as part of a parliamentary fact-finding mission to Israel and Palestine in the early 2000s. I visited Ramallah. We met with activists there. We visited Bethlehem and experienced the situation where in one part of a town, the Israeli part of the town, life carried on as normal. People were walking the streets, sitting in restaurants and cafes and enjoying life. And we walked and walked until we came to the Palestinian side. It was deserted. As we walked into that side, the Israeli army started following us. As we walked, we saw children who had been under a 24-hour curfew for almost a week. They had ventured, as any child would, out of their houses to play. And when they saw the soldiers, they turned and ran back into their houses. And I think it reminded many of us of where we came from in the 1980s. Except I think very few of us ever experienced a 24-hour a day, week-long curfew. However, we have not done enough. To quote President Mandela, "We are proud of the modest technical assistance that our government is offering Palestine, but the various discussions with our counterparts in Palestine are an indication that we can do more." Close quote. In the year that we celebrate the centenary of Nelson Mandela, we recommit ourselves to his legacy and his allegiance to the Palestinian people. We will continue to show that South Africa cares about human rights and international law. We cannot stand and watch as the dispossession of Palestine continues with seeming impunity. When, as a government, we enter into memoranda of understanding with the Palestinian people or withdraw our ambassador from Israel, we're doing this also because of what our people are saying we must do. We are listening to events like this, where the people of South Africa are saying loudly and clearly that we don't want our democratically elected government to be associated with oppression and with a violation of international law. We would also then like to acknowledge, especially those artists that are increasingly supporting the Palestinian struggle and solidarity movement. Just as the many, many artists from all over the world boycotted South Africa in the cultural boycott, refused to play in South Africa. There's a growing list of South African entertainers that we would want to pay tribute to. Kagiso Lediga, Riyad Musa, Joey Rasdien, Tumi Molekani, Simpiwe Dana, Lebo Mashile, HHP, Nina Hasti, and many others who have come out in recent years in support of the Palestinian struggle. They in turn are joined by international actors and entertainers including Mark Ruffalo, John Cusack, Stevie Wonder, Lauryn Hill, Lupe Fiasco, Harry Belafonte, Penelope Cruz, Danny Glover, and others who have either cancelled Israeli gigs or voiced support for Palestinian solidarity initiatives and embarked on other similar initiatives. On the academic front, in our own country, the University of Johannesburg, I wonder why, in 2011 terminated its relations with Israel in protest against Israeli policies of apartheid. Various SRCs have taken the lead in adopting academic boycott of Israeli institutions. Last year, Tshwane University of Technology officially endorsed the BDS academic boycott of Israel. The ANC, for its part, at an NEC level, has resolved that, quote, companies that do business in the Israeli-occupied territories, such as Cape Gate, G4S, Security, and Caterpillar, must not be allowed to do business with the South African state. The NEC has also resolved to join the call for a cultural, academic, and education boycott of Israel, including travel bans for members and leaders of the ANC, the Alliance, members of cabinet, members of parliament, and government officials. In addition, the ANC has resolved last year at our most recent national conference to immediately and unconditionally downgrade the South African embassy in Israel. These measures in South Africa are in tandem with efforts elsewhere across the world. There really does seem to be a turning point in the issue of Palestine and Israel. From within my own portfolio in government as Deputy Minister for Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs, we've noted with other colleagues that a growing number of municipalities, cities, and councils have last year adopted various resolutions in support of Palestine and the boycott of Israel. These include Ireland's capital Dublin, Chile's southern city of Valdivia, 3 Italian city councils, and more than 30 municipalities in Spain. One of the nations, On that point, I just want to reinforce some of what Comrade Parks Tau said earlier. You know, one of the defining features, the way that the liberation movement has historically characterized apartheid, was colonialism of a special type. And one of the essential features of colonialism of a special type was the fact that our country was geographically split up and people were divided according to different races, different ethnicities. Within our cities and towns, areas were broken up for people of different races to live in separate residential areas. That, of course, was done partly because of racism, but it was a fundamental aspect of our economy. To have homelands as cheap reservoirs of cheap labor, to have a migrant labor system enforced by past laws, and our cities and towns and urban areas essentially being dormitory cities and towns to provide labor to mines and factories. And that is a spatial legacy that we as South Africa still grapple with, because our cities and towns in many cases are still fragmented. People need to, and especially working class people, need to travel vast distances. Statistics South Africa indicates that amongst the poorest South Africans, they have to spend approximately 20% of their income on transport. We need to reverse those apartheid spatial patterns. But when one goes to Palestine, that situation is almost more in your face than in South Africa, where the country, as you can see, is carved up. Yeah. Oh. Broken up. How do people move? And unlike Comrade Parks, I did have I can't call it the pleasure, but I had the honor to visit Gaza and to meet Comrade Yasser Arafat at the headquarters. He was living there at the time because it was too dangerous in Ramallah. And he was confined there. The Israelis weren't allowing him to travel. But how do you move between those different areas? And those things are blocked with walls, military checkpoints within the cities. Those residential areas are carved up. So the degree of spatial injustice and spatial oppression that Palestinian people, and especially working class Palestinian people, undergo is tremendous. And it's for that reason also that as a department, we have an entity called the Municipal Infrastructure Support Agency. We've entered into MOUs with Palestinian cities to deploy engineers to help them with some of the infrastructural challenges that they face. But of course we know that it's a good gesture to provide that technical support. But those problems will never be solved until the fundamental political problem is not solved. And therefore we say loudly and clearly that our support for the people of Palestine is not a favor, it's not charity, it's our revolutionary duty, and in fact, it is a test of our own humanity. So we thank BDS for organizing this event, and we thank our comrades from Barcelona who have traveled long and far to be with us and to engage in this exercise of solidarity. Solidarity forever. Sorry, I can't sing, but you get the idea. Viva solidarity, viva! Viva Palestine, viva! Amandla!